What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Juan Soto is a New York Met agreeing to a 15-year, $765 million contract. The Soto chase, the Soto saga, it has finally come to an end. Connor Rogers here alongside my co-host, as always, Joe DeMayo. Joe, this was a huge buildup. There was ups and downs. There was peaks and valleys. It started to feel like a real roller coaster over the last 24 hours. But finally, we have clarity where Juan Soto, we think, will be playing what we think will be the rest of his career. Just your initial reaction right off the top when this came through.
Unbelievable. Just truly a monumental day for this franchise. And I think for Mets fans, this is going to be one of the things you're going to remember where you were when you saw the tweet and everything come through that Juan Soto had agreed to a deal with the Mets. And I sure will remember where I was. And to your point, Connor, about the roller coaster of the last week, the last few days, I have been generally very confident that I thought Juan Soto was going to end up with the Mets. I used it from in my opinion, sheer logic standpoint. Steve Cohen has the most money. Juan Soto has Scott Boras. He probably wants the most money. I would be lying if I said I didn't have a little bit of pause today, mid-afternoon into the evening. I was like, this guy's just going to go back to the Yankees. But man, Juan Soto is a New York Met.
Well, you said it, Joe. Everybody will remember where they were. I was panic refreshing on my laptop and on my phone, scrolling, waiting for it, because it felt like this was finally the night after day after day. SNY's Andy Martino had even tweeted, like, this is probably going to come to a head tonight, finally. We knew we were close. And I think, God, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, number one, let's just talk about the actual contract. It is a 15-year, $765 million deal. After 5 years, Soto has the ability to opt out of the contract. The Mets can essentially override that opt-out by basically it would bump up his salary. $4+ million a year would bring the total contract to a 15-year, $805 million deal. So somewhat similar to what the Yankees have had with Garrett Cole before. But overall, there was rumors flying around everywhere. The Yankees, I think, went higher than a lot of people initially thought, which gave the reaction that you had, Joe, that a lot of people started to have. Maybe if the Yankees get to $700+ million or keep it close to the Mets, he'll just go back to the Yankees, whether it's the feeling of unfinished business. They made it to the World Series, but they lost, whether it's playing with Aaron Judge, whether it's just like being in the Bronx. That was not the case. And I think there's a lot of credit to go around here. As John Heyman said, the Yankees offer was 16 years, $760 million. That's not a jarring difference. If you told me that the Mets were going to get this done and you asked me to guess what the difference would be from the Mets closing offer to the next best offer, I would expect a $30 to $35 million gap. And that was overall not the case here. And I think part of that, Joe, is that the awareness or what Steve Cohen has built, not just the stability now with Mendoza and Stearns here, but the fact is the Mets are going to remain flexible, and we're going to get into all of that. What is next? We have to talk about the now, though, with Soto. But the ability to keep adding and keep building here and what they were able to accomplish last season throughout the postseason and what they want to accomplish in the offseason and what they've done in previous offseasons as well. So, Joe, I think at the end of the day, while money matters, and the reason Juan Soto will be wearing a Met uniform, well, there's 765 million of them. But beyond that, it's not always that easy when you're deciding what you're going to do with the rest of your professional athletic life. And I think Steve Cohen deserves a lot of credit for that. I think David Stearns deserves a lot of credit for that. Hell, look at the 2024 New York Mets that deserve a lot of credit for that. He's across town, and he's seeing what Francisco Lindor can do, what young stars like Mark Vientos can do. And I think all of these things kind of accumulated up into one big thing where Juan Soto was not only comfortable going to be a New York Met, but excited to dedicate the rest of his career as a New York Met.
Not to make this about the Yankees and, this is about the Mets signing Juan Soto. But to your point, Connor, 760 versus 765. I mean, we don't know the context of the Yankees offer. Maybe there was heavy deferrals in it. And we know the Mets have no deferrals in their contract, but theoretically, Juan Soto just chose the Mets over the Yankees, just simply put. And I think when you think about 2024 and when we were heading to spring training and we did the show day one there, and we were talking about expectations for the season, we were like, hey, if things really break right, the Mets could win 86 games and maybe sneak into a third wild card. But we weren't overly optimistic that was going to be the case. Would this day be here if the Mets fell short and they traded Pete Alonso away and they traded Sean Manaea and they traded all these guys away for prospects? Would Juan Soto have wanted to sign with the Mets off not succeeding? And we'll never know the answer to that question because the Mets ended up playing good baseball and making the playoffs and deep into, the NLCS. The reality here is the checkbook matters. But as Andy Martino said on SNY Live after the agreement, Steve Cohen won him over being Steve Cohen, the salesman, not just Steve Cohen, the checkbook.
And honestly, it's so funny when you think of all of the sideshows that were involved in this entire saga throughout the week. A lot of what we heard was, of course, the Yankees history, but also playing at Yankee Stadium, how that Parks Dimensions was perfect for him. How the Red Sox were pitching him on Fenway, how those Parks Dimensions were perfect for him. This tweet from Will Salmon, who does a great job covering the Mets. Juan Soto's bat works everywhere. His numbers at Citi Field, though, are something else. In 35 career games at Citi Field, 146 plate appearances, he has an OPS of 1.175, basically well over 1,000, with 12 home runs, including 2 of the 5 longest home runs in stadium's history, 466 feet, 463 feet. The bottom line is Juan Soto is one of the best hitters in baseball, and Juan Soto hits everywhere. It doesn't matter, and he will hit at Citi Field. That wasn't a deterrent to him. And you're right. Steve Cohen comes in and knows how to be a salesman, but knows how to actually pitch relationships from owner to player. And we saw that with Francisco Lindor before his extension. We now see it with Juan Soto coming here. And now if you're a Mets fan, you're sitting here, you can dream big. That's the beauty of all of this. You are looking at a lineup that, as it sits here today, consists of Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and Mark Vientos. Give it a week or two, and we could have Pete Alonso right back in that cleanup spot, which, I mean, Joe, do we go to the what's next? There's just so much here in the now with Juan Soto. Give me just a little bit more on Juan Soto's overall fit with the actual team, and then we'll talk about what the Mets have to do, considering they've already added 2 arms to the starting rotation. And on our full show, we'll get really, really in-depth on the addition of Clay Holmes because we haven't touched on that yet. But right now, this is all about the offense.
To Will Salmon's point, special players can hit. The stadium doesn't matter. It's just where the walls are. And the walls don't matter when Juan Soto's at the plate. And I want to shout out one stat. It's from Matthew Brownstein on Twitter. When you talk about, there's different people that debate how special of a player is Juan Soto. And we're not going to deny some of the faults. Defensively, it's not amazing. I think people think he's a horrific defensive player, and that's not accurate either. He's a below average guy from a range standpoint, and he's got a plus arm. And yeah, he's not going to go steal you a bunch of bases. But you want to talk about something really unique? Here's a list of players with 200 plus home runs and a career on base percentage of .420 or better through their age 25 season. Jimmy Fox, pretty good. Mickey Mantle, I think you've heard of him, and Juan Soto. That is the end of that list. This is a generational hitter. People will debate generational player because of the total skill set, but from an offensive standpoint, nobody puts up a better at bat in the sport than Juan Soto does. Nobody exudes the confidence. I mean, the home run in the American League Championship Series that basically led the Yankees to the World Series. Saw the pitch from Hunter Gaddis, steps out, he goes, okay, I got you, and just takes it out to right center. That confidence is going to fit in so well in this clubhouse with this Mets roster, and it's just crazy to think, Connor. And I don't want to think about history. I want to think about now and the future. But I saw this tweet also on Twitter. It was 5 years ago that the Mets were their offseason bragging was that they signed Dylan Betances, Rick Porcello, and traded for Jake Marisnick. And here we are. The New York Mets have signed the biggest contract in the history of Major League Baseball. And for a truly just special, unique player, crazy that we're here. Great time to be a Mets fan.
And this one is about truly having a foundation in place, right? An absolute core, which the Mets have done in a variety of ways. They traded for and extended Francisco Lindor. They've obviously drafted and developed Mark Vientos. Same could be said for Pete Alonso. You have international signings like Francisco Alvarez, of course, and that's going to be a big part of their building as well. But Juan Soto is a free agent acquisition that just turned 26 years old in October. This is a true foundational piece. This isn't one of these stopgap kind of situations, when they went out and got Verlander, even when they got Marte, who we really, really liked. They gave Marte a 4-year deal because they wanted the player, but Marte was heading towards being past his prime and being, a speed player that was going to be in his mid-30s. This is a freshly turned 26-year-old slugger that the skill set, with his patience at the plate, with his eye at the plate, his ability to get on base and hit for power, should theoretically age well. But before you even have the age well conversation, he's heading towards his prime, not away from it. That's why the cost is what it was and why it was so important to get this done, outside of all the secondary things that the Mets are taking away the star from the Yankees. The Mets are getting a guy that won a World Series with the Nationals. And say what you want about the Nationals as a division rival. Obviously, Mets fans are more focused on the Braves and Phillies in recent history. That means something as well. And this is a team that it felt like they arrived a little early last year when they made it as far as they did, and they came up short in the NLCS against the Dodgers. You want to actually put your foot down and say, we're not happy with overachieving. We're not happy being the little guy under the radar. Rex Ryan said it really well once. He said, in polite terms, screw that. You want to be the team on top. You want the bullseye on you. You want to go in and, kick everyone's ass. And the Mets getting Juan Soto in the middle of this lineup right now, that kind of star power, and something you alluded to, Joe, the confidence, something that was a problem with previous Mets teams, not last year's, but previous Mets teams, the confidence and that kind of personality and swagger on the field, it just completely changes the dynamic of this franchise to me.
And when you think about, you mentioned taking him from the Yankees, and I know it's whatever, but that's a culture changing thing. This is unprecedented in every sense of the word. And just thinking about a 26-year-old player at this quality, and plenty of people are saying Shohei Ohtani got $700 million and he's two players. Well, 10 years versus 15 years is a little bit different there. And the reality too, when you're thinking about a 15-year contract, sure, when you go to the back end, it's probably not going to be overly pretty. But I am going to worry about the year 2038 when we get there. It's 2025 or heading into 2025, and the Mets have one of the very best hitters in baseball smack dab in the middle of their lineup. And if they want it to be that way, he is going to be a New York Met for the remainder of his baseball career. And it's crazy that we're here. I say that, I'm saying that a lot, but I keep seeing the thing right below us that Juan Soto agreed to that deal with the New York Mets. And it's hard to believe that we're still here.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And, of course, subscribe to the Mets Pod wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch every episode on YouTube, and you can leave some mailbag questions in there as well. All right, Joe, let's kind of look around now at the market, because this is a huge move. It's a move we're never going to stop talking about on our normal weekly shows. But I think there is a part of the Met fan that understandably, because he's a homegrown player, wants to know, but what about Pete Alonso now? Did the Mets spend all of the money? Are the Mets just going to sit on their hands and go, hopefully the flyers we made on the rotation are going to work, and we have some guys in the system that'll hopefully step up, but this is the team. We got the guy. Because let's be real, any other team that signed Juan Soto, this was going to be it. I don't think that's the case for the Mets, Joe. All along, we've been told that Pete Alonso is a separate entity. He's a separate order of business. I think the Mets are not treating this as we got Juan Soto. Now we need to be really careful with a Pete Alonso contract. I think the Mets were looking at it all along and saying, we want Pete to test his market and get back to us of what that market is. We're not going to bid against ourselves for a player we all love, but at the end of the day, is a right-handed, power-hitting first baseman that is approaching his 30s. And you just don't want to, once again, bid against yourselves if you don't have to. But Joe, I think getting Juan Soto doesn't decrease the chance of Pete Alonso being back. I think it enhances the chance of Pete Alonso being back. Pete, I think all along, wants to be a New York Met. He just needs to do what's best for him financially. But now you're looking at a situation. I rode out some of the tough years already. Now you're telling me I'm going to be going back and hitting behind Juan Soto, can finish in the Mets history books for home runs, and we got as good a shot as anybody to win a World Series year after year?
Like you said, Connor, you said just a minute ago, it's foot on the gas time. When you overachieve and you make the National League Championship Series, whether you like it or not, the expectations are now higher. You can't go back and try to play the underdog again. You can't put the genie back into the bottle and try to figure out the magic. I think from a Pete Alonso standpoint, the Mets' stance probably is relatively unchanged. I think they were always going to approach it pragmatically. I don't think it's all right, we got Juan Soto, so that means Pete Alonso needs to be back no matter the cost. Juan Soto was the guy, and you and I were texting about this. This is the one where this is the Juan, as I should say. This is the Juan where the limit does not exist, and you do whatever you have to do to pull in this player. Pete Alonso is one of those. It would be wonderful to have him back because I think you do want somebody behind Juan Soto that you can truly trust to be a stable part of the lineup. We love Mark Vientos, and I think he's a budding star. The reality is he's really done it for like 4 months. So there is a question that has to be answered there. I think Pete Alonso wants to be back. I think the Mets have interest in having Pete Alonso back. And the market, maybe it's going to change now that Soto's off the board and these other teams now have all this money to play with, and this could help Alonso's market get to the spot that he wants it to. But I felt all along that this was something that we're probably going to have to wait a while. I don't think it's going to be a quick resolution, but I think there is a middle ground here between what Pete wants and what the Mets want, where they could find a common ground that could keep Pete Alonso in the middle of this lineup for years to come.
Right, that makes the most sense. And ultimately that'll, be up to Pete as well. Pete needs to figure out if, it could be a situation like we just witnessed. Is there a gap in money where Pete goes, no, I have endorsement deals in New York. I do a lot of charity work in New York. Like that gap, I'm okay with this gap. But this other gap, an extra year, an extra 2 years, and the same is going to apply for Sean Manaea, Joe. I mean, they need a lot of work on this rotation still, even after adding Frankie Montas, adding Clay Holmes. We know they're still going to talk to Manaea. We know they're going to talk to Walker Buehler. We've heard them connected to Nathan Eovaldi. We've heard them connected to basically every starting pitcher that isn't Corbin Burns or Max Fried, because we, on this podcast at least, we just don't believe that's the pitching waters the Mets want to swim in, is handing out 6-7 year deals to guys in 30 and up, because most of the time history tells you it's not a sound investment. So you can kind of see that the Stearns method is with pitching is going on the shorter term deals and going for upside, which he hit a home run last year in Manaea, and he had a pretty good bet on Luis Severino as well. He's trying to replicate that with some different players, but it's going to be similar for Pete Alonso right now. He's going to have to figure out what are the priorities to him. But the good news is, Joe, I don't even think it just stops there. If Pete Alonso finds an offer out there that the Mets just aren't comfortable with, it doesn't mean to me that they're just going to put Mark Vientos at first base and give Brett Beatty the third base job or bring back Jose Iglesias for the third base job. I think the Mets would go out and look at a Christian Walker or look at other options that are power hitting corner guys. So I think foot on the gas was the perfect way to put it, is that now there's a sense of urgency. We have a 26-year-old Juan Soto, a guy that could be an MVP candidate in the National League. Oh, yeah, and we also have Francisco Lindor in his prime, a guy that wasn't an MVP candidate in the National League. You're right. That just kind of changes. And think of the pressure that it takes off of Francisco Alvarez, where he comes up at 20, 21 years old, and everyone's looking at it like, can this be a 30 home run, cleanup hitting catcher at that age, which there's so many different responsibilities for him. I don't want to say he becomes an afterthought now because that seems so wildly disrespectful. But Francisco Alvarez hitting 8th or 9th, the guy with 30 home run potential, just goes to show you the kind of talent the Mets have. And they have two guys specifically to me at the top that are built to take on all of the pressure of playing in New York, and that is Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. And the trickle effect or the ease that could put on everyone else in the lineup could bring out the best in everyone else in this lineup. Everybody knows when they walk in that clubhouse, when they see Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, we have as good a shot as you could ask for to win the baseball game we're playing tonight. They don't feel like, man, if I get up there and I get 2 strikes early in the count and I'm chasing and you just start spiraling out of control, what it builds for an actual team and everybody around them, but most importantly, the young players, cannot be understated.
100%, Connor. When you think about how deep this lineup can be, let's play in the world that they do bring back Pete. And to your point, if Pete Alonso does go elsewhere, it doesn't mean that, Mark Vientos goes to first and a young player takes third. They can go pursue a first baseman. They could pursue a third baseman. Maybe they like Alex Bregman. I don't know, but like there's options out there for the Mets to continue to improve this team. And when you take, we don't have every single detail of the Soto contract, but if we just want to use the raw number of saying it's $51 million per year, the Mets luxury tax payroll at the moment is right in the neighborhood of $251 million. And the Mets spent like 360, I think, last year. They don't necessarily need to go to those limits, but they're capable. Steve Cohen is able to do that. He's proven year over year that he's willing to. But when you talk about just the young players, to your point, it takes so much pressure off of, I would say specifically Alvarez, because Vientos has kind of established himself almost as a middle of the order type of guy. As you said, right now, the top of the order is Lindor, Soto, Vientos. Alvarez, still, to me, and I still firmly believe he has all-star potential, and that's not something that I throw around very often when I talk about young players. So I'm just as high on Alvarez really as I ever was. The only question I have is, maybe he's just not quite as complete of a hitter as I thought he was going to be, but 30 home run power, 100% could be there, and you're hitting him 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere down in the order. It makes his life easier by having these great players. And let's not even mention Brandon Nimmo's pretty darn good himself.
It's amazing. It's the first mention of Brandon Nimmo on this podcast, and he's obviously a hell of a player that things just get better for him. Let's get some questions in from the YouTube comments, which we really appreciate everybody staying up late and watching with us. It's awesome to have you guys on with us, and it's great to get to some of these questions. All right. Funny one from Dano Jets, who said Connor looks like he drives a Cadillac. They're a great sponsor of our show. I'll say that. We appreciate Cadillac in many ways. All right, C. Carrera. Can we get Walker Buehler, Joe? What do you think of Walker Buehler's market? That, it's crazy. He had such a struggle throughout most of 2024, coming off significant injury. Didn't look like himself. And then when the lights were the brightest in the postseason, Walker Buehler found something his last couple appearances and just feels like a guy that, once again, general managers that chase upside would love to bet on him. He kind of fits the profile of a pitcher Stearns would target.
He's very popular out there on the market. And yes, the Mets have, according to multiple reporters, the Mets have at minimum checked in, certainly have talked to Walker Buehler. I think he's on the table. I think any of these starting pitchers are on the table. You mentioned them: Sean Manaea, Nathan Eovaldi, Nick Pivetta got the qualifying offer, and after signing Soto, maybe they'd have a little more pause there. But Jack Flaherty, there's arms out there, and David Stearns has made it abundantly clear that adding to the rotation was a priority, and they've added Frankie Montas, they've added Clay Holmes, which we'll talk about, but they need at minimum one more, if not two. And I think Walker Buehler's a fantastic fit that falls right in the realm that I think David Stearns likes to operate, which it's 2 years with an opt-out, 3 years with an opt-out, something along those lines, I think is probably where Walker Buehler's market is going to fall. And there's no question the Mets can afford to do it. It's just a matter of making the contract work and him having a desire to be here.
Let me throw a question at you, Joe, from my end. You know the farm system as well as anybody. When you look at Juan Soto now, in theory, holding down right field for as long as we think and just holding out a key spot in this lineup, do you think it increases the chance of Stearns letting a prospect or two go to add to this rotation that can really use a proven arm?
I think that's totally on the table. And, Soto's obviously a factor there, but a part of it is just you have Soto and you have Lindor at two obviously key spots, and they're there forever and ever. All right, let's talk about, there's Jet Williams, there's Luis Angel Acuna, there's Drew Gilbert, there's Ryan Clifford. There's all these young players that there just isn't enough physical positions for them all to play. So you got to pick the timing. When does it make sense? And you know what, Connor? Giving out $51 million a year and a $765 million contract to Juan Soto, not saying the Mets need to be quote unquote cheap, but look, this is where the marriage of Steve Cohen and David Stearns put the Mets at such an advantage. When this type of player is available, Steve Cohen has the financial wherewithal to make sure it happens. And now, by the way, he's proven he could do it, because this is something we were talking about. Last year, it was just like, oh, yeah, he'll outbid the market for Yamamoto, and that didn't happen. He didn't land him. He now landed that fish. And the advantage of David Stearns is, okay, if you're going to pay those huge dollars here, you need to save some dollars here, and that's where David Stearns shines. So I think the trade market is totally on the table. I am ready to make a big trade for Garrett Crochet. I don't know how that fit necessarily works from a player-for-player trade thing that works for the White Sox. But if you tell me that I could get my hands on Garrett Crochet, that is something I would be heavily pursuing if I was David Stearns right now.
Yeah, Crochet would be obviously a insane ad. I mean, he's the best we think available arm out there, but available can mean a lot of things. That could mean,
in my opinion, Connor, I think Garrett Crochet is the best pitcher available, and that includes the free agents.
I would completely agree with you. I think, at least from an upside standpoint and longevity standpoint, there's an argument to be had that you'd rather have Garrett Crochet the next 5 years over Max Fried or Corbin Burns. And some people will think that's crazy because Crochet hasn't done it as long as those guys. But when you just look at the age and the stuff profile, I would be with you, Joe. What's interesting with Crochet, it sounds like whoever trades from him would probably also be working out an extension. So I don't know if that would factor in the Mets' interest. That might enhance the Mets' interest depending on what he wants. You never know. That would be, and we've seen many times trades for pitchers kind of come out of nowhere. It's, even back years ago when the Mets got Chris Bassett, it was like, oh, we didn't know that was a possibility on the table. So my prediction going forward would be, I see them trading for a starter. I still think they are going to play the free agent market on offense. I think they'll obviously try to bring Pete back. I think they'll even try to bring Jose Iglesias back as well and just kind of have that Swiss Army knife for the infield. Now, that depends on a lot of things. We don't have a lot of clarity on where Ronnie Mauricio is at. We don't know what the organization thinks of Luis Angel Acuna's future for the long term or Jeff McNeil's future for the short term. But I think they're going to play in those markets for offense. But I could see pitching, Joe, reach a point where they'd rather try to trade for a high-profile arm than give out that fourth or fifth year to Manaea, who we love and we want back. But it's just going to be interesting how they weigh their options in that area.
I think one thing that I would like to see the Mets do in the starting pitching, and by the way, I am all aboard the David Stearns philosophy of just going for upside and trying as much upside as possible and realizing that a couple hits will outweigh the miss or two that kind of comes along with it. I do think the Mets could use some stability or someone that they feel they could count on for innings. Doesn't necessarily need to be an ace per se, but I think the Mets need to get somebody in here. And that's why I think, there's some concerns maybe with Nathan Eovaldi. In the second half, his velocity has taken a dip the last couple of years, but he's the kind of guy I think you could rely on for steady innings. And if you get into the playoffs, he's a huge, big time playoff pitcher. We talked about Jordan Montgomery. Maybe Jordan Montgomery is someone that you visit there on the trade market, and you could get Arizona to eat some money.
You get him for free.
Yeah. As David Stern said when the offseason started, the player universe in its entirety is open to the Mets. And I think that is purely the truth. And that's both the free agent and the trade market.
I mean, he turned on the PS5 and got Juan Soto, Joe. I mean, let's be real here. Like, yes, the entire player universe is available to David Stern. So, all right, let's talk about Clay Holmes, because we haven't recorded a Mets pod since he signed. I think this was one of those where Clay Holmes had a lot of interest on the free agent market. And then Joel Sherman was all over this one from the New York Post. And then all of a sudden there was the little footnote in there, Joe, that, hey, teams are talking to Clay Holmes about converting to being a starting pitcher. And everybody was like, really? Like, is this for real? And then 2 days go by and the Mets signed Clay Holmes to a 3-year deal, which in theory makes a ton of sense. We knew the Mets were going to be in on all kinds of arms from relief help to starting help. We knew that they don't have a setup man right now for Edwin Diaz. And then right after the signing is reported, Jeff Passan says their plan is to make him a starter. What do you think of Clay Holmes' profile as a starting pitcher, Joe? I know the recency bias towards him, specifically from Yankee fans, is this guy melted and couldn't lock down games anymore and get saves. Over the last 3 to 4 years, Clay Holmes not only has good stuff, but has been a hell of a reliever in this league. But does it project for a guy that could be stretched out and actually hold down a spot in the rotation?
I think it does, actually. And I don't care that he gave up the home run in the playoffs to Big Christmas in Cleveland. Clay Holmes was awesome for the Yankees. So any Yankee fan not appreciating what Clay Holmes did for them, I think, is a little out there. But that's neither here nor there. Just talking about Clay Holmes, his potential transition as a starter, I would say I'm intrigued. When you look at his pitch mix, obviously he has an incredible sinker, one of the better sinkers in the sport, 100th percentile ground ball rate. I think that plays better in the starting rotation than it does at the end of baseball games, because the worst thing that could happen on a ground ball theoretically is a single. And a single could really take you out in the 9th inning. It's not going to take you out necessarily in the 3rd inning. He has 2 distinct sliders. He has the gyro slider, which is the slider that kind of breaks down much more like a Diaz slider or a Jacob deGrom. Like, those are a type of sliders that are gyro sliders. And then he also has the sweeper. And both of those breaking balls are huge swing and miss pitches for him. What I think he's going to have to figure out here to make this work is he's going to need one more pitch, whether that is being able to elevate that 4-seam fastball. That's something that has kind of fallen out of his repertoire over the last few years. He threw, I think, under 10 4-seam fastballs in the year 2024. Or you're looking at a splitter, a changeup, something like that. So I think he does need to add to his repertoire. And one thing you will be thinking about here is the innings. Through 60-something innings this year. The most he's thrown in a few years is 70. He obviously came up as a starter like most relievers do. You would think that inning number would be like capped at like 130, something like that for year one. But from a sheer stuff standpoint, durability standpoint, this is a good gamble considering what these starting pitchers are going for on the market. Right. The Mets gave Frankie Montas $17 million a year for 2 years, and the opt-out's in there. Luis Severino signs with the Athletics for almost $23 million a year. The Mets got Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes for a tick under $30 million for this year. That's David Stern's finding value with upside, which I think is ultimately how he probably will want to build pitching staffs forever and ever, until he's able to get some of the young talent to come and help on their own. Brandon Sproat come up, Blade Tidwell, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, these pitchers in the system that have had big years and really increase their stock. Once they're in the picture, okay, you don't need to sign Frankie Montas because you have Brandon Sproat. And now you have $17 million to play with to give to something else. The value of it all is really, really, really important. And I think from just the home standpoint, I would call myself intrigued.
Right. And here's my take on it, Joe. At the end of the day, with Clay Holmes, you either look like a genius because it works. He ends up being a starter, and you got a starting pitcher at what, $12 million a year, or it doesn't really go the way you want it to, and you make him a setup man for Edwin Diaz, where over the last 3 years, Clay Holmes in the Yankees bullpen has a 2.85 ERA right now. So, I mean, there's a proven track record of something he's already good at while striking out 10 over 9. Or there's even more of this deal. So it'll be really interesting. It'll be a key sign of pitching development of how that goes. All right, one last question before we get out of here. This is from Julian Weinberg. What's Marte's outlook now, Joe? Because obviously Marte's a guy that, you know, his legs have kind of been failing him recently, but he can still hit. Credit to Marte, but he hasn't been the caliber right fielder that we were used to for so long in his career. Soto is going to be playing right field. Nimmo is going to be playing left field. And why I bring up the point about Marte's legs is I don't want anyone sitting here and going, put Marte back in center field. Like, those days are long behind us, folks. So to me, Joe, Marte becomes a guy that spells the corners, the corner guys in the outfield, can DH for you with how effective he is against lefties, and the fact that you don't have a DH clogging that spot at this very moment. And what a luxury, Joe, to have a Starling Marte on your bench, and that could be the best for his health next year on the final year of his Mets contract.
And one thing to remember before I briefly talk about Marte's role here, he and Juan Soto have a very, very long-standing relationship. Juan Soto and him were friends before Juan Soto ever made the major leagues. They trained with the same guy down in the Dominican Republic. So there's a long-standing friendship there. So that's something that I think that will help to the clubhouse culture, and for a lot of people, because trust me, I've seen you all. I'm very online, so I've seen it all. The Mets don't need to dump Starling Marte. In fact, I would say they probably shouldn't dump Starling Marte. I think if you can get him off his feet somewhat, playing the outfield every day, I think is a key reason why he endures the lower body injuries that he has. If you can make him part of a DH platoon, or maybe even get the bulk of DH at bats, what Starling Marte showed down the stretch is that he still can hit when he is healthy. And even when he's not healthy, he has shown he could still steal bases if he gets on. So I think he adds an element where, kind of uniquely, right, where Juan Soto doesn't provide those traits necessarily with the base running, and he's going to be playing out in the outfield. You could DH Marte, potentially keep him healthier, and maybe reap the rewards of his ability to steal bases and his ability to still hit. So to me, I think Marte does have a role on this team, and I would not be in any rush whatsoever to get him out the door.
No, and I don't think the Mets will. Number one, just the money that he's owed on the final year of his deal for now is, significant enough that you might not have teams trying to take that money on for a 36-year-old. And number two, like you said, Joe, there's still value to having that kind of veteran bench bat that, for all Marte's lower body injuries over the years, he still stole 24 bases in 2023 and 16 bases last year. Like, there's legitimate wheels off the bench if you can keep him healthy. And something the Mets have been able to do in the Cohen era is their sports science and nutrition department that Luis Severino significantly shouted out to keep him healthy last year as well. Another positive aspect of this organization moving forward. All right, as we wrap up here, a crazy tweet from Zach Scott. As Brewers GM/president, David Stern spent $768 million on payroll over his entire tenure. That was from 2016 to 2022. He just committed $765 million to one dude. It's a little different over here in New York, David Stearns.
He must be loving life right now.
Yeah, it's like playing the game with the easy mode and cheat codes.
these are the things I think David Stern's always wanted to do and knew he couldn't do. So he had to operate how he had to operate in Milwaukee. It is a different beast with a Steve Cohen-owned Mets.
All right, we thank everybody for rocking with us tonight with the Mets Pod Live. The good news for you, if you enjoyed it, we're going to be doing this the next 3 nights during the winter meetings. The fun is just getting started. We are going to be live Monday. We're going to be live Tuesday. We're going to be live Wednesday. We are going to have guests on, and that is going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time on all of SNY social platforms. Of course, SNY's YouTube channel is probably the easiest. We can see your comments under there. We could take all your questions. It's going to be a ton of fun. Joe and I are going to have a ton to unpack here, not just more on the Soto deal, but the Mets going forward. And let's not forget, there's going to be a lot of rumors flying around with Pete Alonso and Sean Manaea, Mets free agents, external free agents. David Stearns is, listen, he's not kicking his feet up after landing the big fish in Juan Soto. The Mets are going to be really, really busy. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today, and please subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. If you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts with a question, we will answer that question on the show. Of course, we appreciate those reviews. You could always watch us on SNY's YouTube channel. Please become a subscriber over there as well. We'll be back tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern time, covering everything from the winter meetings.